The soft chime of the apartment door startled me as I unpacked the last of my groceries. I wasn't expecting anyone, least of all her. Standing in the doorway was my new roommate. Tall and impossibly graceful, her iridescent skin shimmered faintly under the glow of the hallway lights. She wasn't human, far from it. Her people, the Lumini, had arrived on Earth just 2 decades ago, seeking refuge after the catastrophic collapse of their home planet. Integration between humans and Lumini was complicated. The government solution? A roommate program meant to foster mutual understanding. "Hello," she said softly, her voice melodic like the hum of distant bells. "I am Kaelyn." Her name flowed off her tongue like music. Her amethyst-colored eyes studied me with an intensity that sent a wave of unease, mixed with fascination, rippling through my chest. "I'm Wes," I replied, setting down a jar of peanut butter that suddenly felt absurdly mundane in her presence. "Come in." Kaelyn stepped inside, her movements fluid yet careful, as though she were trying not to disturb the very air around her. She carried a small duffel bag over her shoulder, but exhaustion radiated from her posture. "Your file said you came from the Southern Lumini clans?" I asked, trying to fill the silence as she surveyed the living room. "Yes," she replied, her gaze lingering on a shelf of books. "And you are from here?" I chuckled. "Yeah, I guess you could say that." She tilted her head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile gracing her lips. It was disarming, how her expressions were both utterly alien and yet strikingly human. After I showed her to the small guest room, Kaelyn hesitated at the door. "This space is generous," she murmured. I frowned. "Generous? It's pretty standard for a roommate setup. You should see some of the closets people rent out in the city." Her violet eyes flickered with what I could only describe as discomfort. "It is uncommon for Lumini to sleep apart from companions, even temporary ones." I froze, caught off guard by her statement. "Wait, you mean you're used to sharing rooms?" "Beds," she clarified simply, her tone matter-of-fact. "It is tradition." I blinked, unsure if she was joking. She didn't seem like the joking type. "Well, that's not really how humans do things. We, like our space. Privacy, you know?" She nodded but said nothing more, retreating in her room with a quiet sigh. The first night passed without incident, though I caught myself thinking about her more than I expected. There was something unsettling about her presence. Not in a bad way, but in a way that left me constantly aware of her. A silent pull at the edges of my mind. By the second night, I started noticing things. Kaelyn moved through the apartment with an almost ghostly quietness, yet she was always aware of me. If I turned a corner, she'd already be looking my way. If I dropped something, she'd pick it up before I could bend down. On the third night, she appeared at my bedroom door. "Wes," she said softly, her voice tinged with something I couldn't place. "Hey, maybe. I cannot sleep." I sat up, rubbing my eyes. "Is something wrong?" She hesitated, clutching the edge of the doorframe, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "The space, it is too empty. I am not meant to be alone." I blinked, still half asleep. Do you want to, talk about it or something?" Her gaze dropped, and for the first time, she looked vulnerable. "No, I need warmth." I swallowed hard. "You're saying you want to sleep here?" She nodded, her silver hair falling over one shoulder. "It is our tradition to share for comfort." I stared at her, her request so absurdly intimate that my brain struggled to process it. But there was no malice in her eyes, no ulterior motive, just raw, honest need. "Okay," I said, finally scooting over. "But just for tonight." Kaelyn crossed the room in a single, graceful motion, slipping into the bed as if she'd done it 1,000 times before. Her presence was startlingly warm, her skin radiating a faint, soothing heat that seeped through the blankets. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yeah," I muttered, staring at the ceiling. "No problem." I woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the disorienting sensation of an arm draped over my chest. It took me a moment to realize it wasn't mine. Kaelyn was curled against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder. Her breathing was slow and steady, and for a moment, I didn't dare move. Her shimmering skin caught the morning light, and I couldn't help but notice how delicate she looked. Yet there was strength there too, a quiet resilience that made my chest ache. As if sensing my thoughts, Kaelyn stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "Good morning," she said softly. "A morning." She didn't move, and neither did I. The moment stretched on, the silence heavy with an unspoken tension neither of us seemed willing to break. Finally, she sat up, brushing her hair back with a graceful hand. "Thank you," she said again, her tone earnest. "For what?" "For not refusing me." I frowned. "Why would I refuse you?" Her gaze met mine, and for the first time, I saw something raw and unguarded in her eyes. "Because I am not human." The words hit me harder than I expected. I opened my mouth to respond, but she was already on her feet, gliding toward the door. "Kaelyn, wait." But she was gone, leaving me alone with 1,000 unanswered questions. Over the next few days, things shifted between us. She no longer retreated to her room, instead slipping into mine each night with quiet determination. At first, it was awkward. Her proximity was both comforting and unsettling, a constant reminder of how alien she was. But as the nights turned into weeks, something changed. I found myself looking forward to the sound of her soft footsteps in the hallway, the warmth of her presence beside me. And then one night, everything changed. "Wes," she said, her voice trembling. I turned to face her, surprised by the emotion in her tone. "What's wrong?" She hesitated, her amethyst eyes searching mine. I need to tell you something." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. This wasn't just about tradition anymore. Something deeper was happening, something neither of us fully understood. And I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. Kaelyn's request lingered in the air as we walked side by side. She'd led me out of the apartment without much explanation, her silvery hair catching the sunlight like strands of liquid light. I didn't press her for details, even though my curiosity burned. Something about her energy, calm but insistent, made me trust her. The city park she'd chosen was sprawling, dotted with clusters of trees that broke up the endless expanse of green. It was quieter here than in the city streets, the hum of traffic softened by the rustling leaves and chirping birds. "This way," Kaelyn said, gesturing to a grove near the far edge of the park. I followed her without hesitation, watching the way her movements carried a deliberate grace, like each step was part of some silent ritual. The trees grew thicker as we moved deeper into the grove, their branches intertwined above us, casting dappled shadows on the ground. Finally, Kaelyn stopped beneath a massive tree whose roots stretched out like ancient arms. She turned to face me, her eyes shimmering with something unspoken. "Here," she said softly, placing her hand on the tree's bark. "This will do." "For what?" I asked, glancing around. "For the memory bond." I blinked. "The memory bond?" Kaelyn smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It is an ancient Lamani tradition. When words are not enough, we share memories instead. It is intimate, sacred, a way of understanding." I felt my pulse quicken. "Wait, are you saying you want to, share memories with me?" She tilted her head, her expression calm. "It is the only way for you to truly understand why I came here, why I left everything behind." Kaelyn, I hesitated, looking down at my hands. "I don't even know if I'd be good at it. What if I mess it up?" "You cannot mess it up, Wes," she said, her voice steady. "The bond does not require skill, only trust." Her words settled over me like a weight. Trust. The word carried a significance I didn't fully understand yet. What does it feel like?" I asked cautiously. Kaelyn's gaze softened, like stepping into a stream of light. "It may be disorienting at first, but I will guide you. You will not be alone." Her reassurance should have made me feel better, but my stomach churned with nerves. Sharing a bed was one thing. Sharing memories, her memories, was something else entirely. "Okay," I said finally, exhaling sharply. "What do I have to do?" Kaelyn gestured for me to sit beneath the tree. The roots curved up around us like the ribs of some great, ancient creature. She lowered herself gracefully across from me, her knees tucked beneath her. "Close your eyes," she instructed. I did as she asked, listening to the faint rustle of leaves above us. "Now," she continued, her voice low and melodic, "breathe. Deep and steady. Let your thoughts quiet." Easier said than done. My thoughts were anything but quiet. Was this going to hurt? What would I see? What would she see? "Wes," Kaelyn murmured. Her voice was close, impossibly close. "Let go." I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to relax. And then I felt it, a warmth, like sunlight breaking through a cold fog. It started at the edges of my awareness, growing stronger with every breath. Kaelyn's presence brushed against mine, not physically, but somewhere deeper, like the whisper of a breeze through the corners of my mind. "Do not fight it," she said gently. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if she could see me. Then the world shifted. At first, there was only light, soft and golden, like the glow of dawn. Shapes began to form, blurry and indistinct, until they sharpened into a scene that took my breath away. I stood on a hilltop beneath two suns. The air was thick and sweet, the sky streaked with colors I couldn't name. In the distance, a city glimmered, its spires twisting and arching like living things. "This is my home," Kaelyn's voice echoed, though I couldn't see her. Or it was... The scene rippled, and suddenly I was there, standing amidst the city's bustling streets. Lemony walked past me, some laughing, others deep in conversation. Their movements were fluid, their voices a symphony of lilting tones. The air buzzed with life and warmth. But beneath it all, I felt something else. A tension, a shadow creeping at the edges of this beautiful place. The memory shifted again, the city fading into darkness. I was in a vast chamber now, filled with Lemony who looked older, wearier. Their faces were drawn, their voices strained. "War," Kaelyn's voice murmured. "We knew it was coming, but we were unprepared. Our world was unprepared." A cold dread settled over me as the scene unfolded. Explosions. Fire. The city I'd just seen, crumbling beneath a storm of destruction. Screams filled the air, and the warmth I'd felt earlier was replaced by suffocating despair. Through it all I saw Kaelyn. She was younger in this memory, her silvery hair tangled and streaked with ash. She was running, leading a group of children through the chaos. Her face was a mask of determination, but her eyes were haunted. "I lost everything that day," Kaelyn said, her voice breaking. "My family, my people, my planet." I wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but I didn't know how. I wasn't even sure if she could feel me here. The memory faded, and I was back beneath the tree, the sunlight filtering through the branches. I opened my eyes to find Kaelyn staring at me, her expression raw and unguarded. I started, but words failed me. What could I possibly say after seeing all that? Kaelyn looked away, her shoulders trembling. "Now you understand," she said softly. "Why I could not be alone. Why I needed this." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "Kaelyn, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I did not want your pity," she interrupted, her voice firm but not unkind. "I only wanted you to see." And I had. I'd seen her pain, her loss, her resilience. But more than that, I'd felt it. The depth of her loneliness. The weight of her survival. "Thank you," I said quietly, the words feeling wholly inadequate. Kaelyn met my gaze, her violet eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "You are the first human I have shown this to," she admitted. "The first I have trusted." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. I reached out without thinking, my hand resting lightly on hers. Her skin was warm, almost too warm, but I didn't pull away. "You're not alone anymore," I said softly. The words hung between us, a quiet promise. Kaelyn stared at me for a long moment before nodding, her fingers curling slightly beneath mine. For the first time since she'd arrived, I saw her smile. It was small, almost fragile, but it was real. And in that moment, I realized something. This connection, whatever it was, wasn't just about understanding her culture or respecting her traditions. It was about her. And maybe, just maybe, it was about us. The walk back to the apartment was quiet, but not uncomfortable. Kaelyn stayed close, her arm brushing mine every so often. She didn't speak, and neither did I. Words seemed unnecessary after what we'd just shared beneath the tree. The memory bond still lingered in the back of my mind, like an afterimage burned into my thoughts. I couldn't stop replaying the scenes of her homeworld, its beauty, its destruction, and the weight of her survival. How had she carried all that with her and still managed to stand so tall? When we reached the apartment, Kaelyn paused at the door, her hand resting lightly on the handle. For the first time, she looked unsure. "What's wrong?" I asked. Her gaze flicked to me, then away. "You must have questions," she said softly. I stepped closer, hesitating before replying. "I do, but I don't want to push you to talk about anything you're not ready for." Her lips curved into a faint smile, and she opened the door. "You're different, Wes. Most humans, they ask much. Too much. But you," she trailed off, her gaze distant. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I let it go. Inside, the apartment felt smaller somehow, as though the quiet intimacy of the park had made everything else seem less significant. Kaelyn went straight to the kitchen, her movements slower than usual. "Tea?" she asked without looking at me. "Sure," I replied, sitting at the counter. She busied herself with the kettle, her back to me. I watched her silently, taking in the way her silvery hair caught the light, the subtle tension in her shoulders. When she finally turned, two steaming cups in her hands, her expression was carefully neutral. She set one in front of me and took the stool across from mine. "I should explain," she said after a long sip. "You don't have to," I said quickly, but she shook her head. "I do," she insisted. "If we are to continue sharing this space, sharing ourselves, then you must understand." There was that word again, sharing. It carried so much weight in her culture, so much meaning. "Okay," I said, setting my cup down. "I'm listening." Kaelyn took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around the mug. "The bond we shared today, it is not something we take lightly. Among my people, it is sacred, a promise of trust, yes, but also a protection. To share memories is to offer a piece of oneself that cannot be taken back." I nodded, remembering the vividness of her memories, how deeply they had moved me. "Does it work both ways?" I asked cautiously. Her gaze lifted to meet mine, her violet eyes softening. "It can if both parties allow it. But you were unprepared, and I did not wish to impose." I swallowed hard. The idea of her seeing my memories, my messy, complicated life, was both terrifying and strangely intriguing. "Kaelyn," I began, my voice low, "why did you choose to show me? You could have kept all that to yourself." She hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Because you are kind, patient. You do not look at me as though I am something strange to be studied. You look at me as though I am," she faltered, searching for the right word. "Just another person?" I offered. She nodded slowly. "Yes, and that is rare." Her honesty left me momentarily speechless. Kaelyn stood abruptly, pacing to the window. She gazed out at the city lights, her back to me. "When I left my world, I swore I would not become attached again. It is easier that way, safer." But she turned, her eyes locking onto mine. "You make it difficult, Wes." I felt my cheeks flush, though I wasn't entirely sure why. I'm not trying to," I stammered. "I know," she said with a faint smile. "And that is why it happens." The air between us grew heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. "Kaelyn," I said, my voice quieter now, "you don't have to protect yourself from me. I'm not here to hurt you." Her expression softened, but there was still something guarded in her gaze. "You cannot promise that, Wes." "No one can." The words stung more than I expected. She wasn't wrong. Trust was always a gamble, and no one could guarantee they wouldn't hurt someone else, even unintentionally. But still, I wanted her to believe in me. "I can't promise it," I admitted, standing and moving closer to her. "But I can promise to try. To be here. To make this, whatever this is, work." She looked up at me, her violet eyes wide with something that might have been surprise or hope. For a moment, The space between us seemed impossibly small. "Wes," she said softly, her voice trembling just enough to be noticeable. I waited, unsure of what she was about to say. But instead of words, she reached out, her fingers brushing lightly against mine. The touch was brief, hesitant, but it was enough to send a jolt of warmth through me. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "For what?" I asked, my throat dry. "For not being afraid of me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I wanted to tell her that I was afraid of messing this up, of saying the wrong thing, of losing whatever fragile connection we'd built. But instead, I just nodded. "You're not so scary," I said lightly, trying to break the tension. Kaelyn tilted her head, a small smile curving her lips. "You are brave to say that." The moment passed, but its weight lingered as we returned to our tea. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard the soft sound of her footsteps in the hallway. A moment later, my door creaked open. "Wes," she whispered. "Yeah," I replied, already scooting over to make room for her. She slid into the bed beside me, her warmth radiating through the blankets. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, though. It was comforting. "Good night, Kaelyn," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "Good night, Wes," she replied, her tone soft and sincere. As I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning, that whatever connection we were building would only grow deeper, more complicated. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. It felt right. The days that followed felt like a strange dream, equal parts routine and profound. Kaelyn and I settled into an easy rhythm, one that seemed almost domestic despite the unspoken tension humming beneath the surface. She still shared my bed each night, her presence both a comfort and a mystery. Her warmth seeped into me as if she carried the glow of a dying sun. And though we barely spoke of what was happening between us, it became clear that neither of us wanted it to stop. But something was changing. One evening, as I washed the dishes, Kaelyn lingered by the window, her gaze fixed on the city below. She hadn't touched her tea, which was unusual. She always savored her nightly ritual. "What's on your mind?" I asked, drying my hands and leaning against the counter. She hesitated, her fingers toying with the edge of her sweater. "There is something I must tell you," she said at last, her voice quieter than usual. I straightened, the weight of her tone setting my nerves on edge. "Okay," I said carefully. "What is it?" Kaelyn turned to face me, her violet eyes brimming with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "When my people fled our world, we did not come to Earth by chance. It was not random." I frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" She stepped closer, her movements slow and deliberate. "The Idali chose Earth because it is compatible with us. Our physiology, our energy, it aligns with this planet in ways that allow us to survive. But there is a cost." "A cost?" I echoed, my heart thudding in my chest. She nodded, her expression heavy. "Our survival requires connection, not just with each other, but with those who share this world. Proximity sustains us, yes, but deeper bonds, they are essential." I felt the weight of her words settle over me, an ache forming in my chest. "You mean you need humans to survive?" "Not all humans," she said quickly. "Only those we form a resonance with. It is rare, but when it happens, it is undeniable. And it is permanent." My mouth went dry. "Kaelyn, are you saying that's what's happening between us?" She held my gaze, her eyes shimmering with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. "Yes," she said simply. "I did not intend for it to happen, Wes. I did not want to impose this on you. But it has, and I cannot undo it." I took a step back, my mind reeling. What does that mean for me? For us? "It means that our bond is now intertwined," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If I were to leave, if we were to separate," she broke off, looking away. "What?" I pressed, my voice sharper than I intended. Kaelyn closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping. "It would weaken me. I would not survive for long without you." The room seemed to tilt, and I grabbed the counter to steady myself. "Kaelyn, why didn't you tell me this sooner?" "Because I wanted you to choose," she said, her voice trembling. I did not want you to feel trapped. I thought perhaps I could endure the pain of separation. But I was wrong. It has already begun. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. What do you mean it's already begun? She lifted her hands, and for the first time, I noticed the faint cracks in her opalescent skin, as if her very essence was fracturing. I cannot survive without the bond, Wes, she said, her tone raw and vulnerable. And I cannot sever it without harming us both. The weight of her admission pressed down on me, suffocating in its enormity. I didn't know what to say, what to feel. All I knew was that the thought of losing her, of her fading away, was unbearable. You should have told me, I said finally, my voice shaking. I know, she whispered, tears glinting in her eyes. I am sorry. For a long moment, we stood in silence, the distance between us feeling vast and insurmountable. But then something inside me shifted. I thought about the nights we'd shared, the quiet moments of trust and vulnerability. I thought about the bond we'd forged, the way her presence had become as natural to me as breathing. And I realized something. I didn't want her to leave. I didn't want to lose her. Kaelyn, I said, my voice steady now. I don't know what this bond means or what it will take, but I'm not going anywhere. We'll figure this out. Together. Her eyes widened, hope flickering in their depths. You mean that? I do, I said, stepping closer. I don't fully understand what's happening between us, but I know I don't want you to suffer. And I don't want to lose you. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she reached for my hand, her fingers trembling. Thank you, she whispered, her voice breaking. You have no idea what this means to me. I squeezed her hand, a strange sense of calm washing over me. We'll take it one step at a time, okay? She nodded, a small smile breaking through her tears. That night, as we lay in bed, Kaelyn rested her head on my shoulder, her breathing slow and steady. The cracks in her skin had already begun to fade, and her warmth seeped into me like a lifeline. I didn't know what the future held for us, but for the first time, I felt certain of one thing. I wouldn't let her face it alone. As I drifted off to sleep, Kaelyn's voice came softly, barely a whisper. You saved me, Wes, and I will not forget it. And as her words wrapped around me like a promise, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to admit before. Maybe she had saved me, too.